What's up, everyone? My name is Alex, and welcome to my little corner of the internet. I wanted to talk about things that influence my gender and things that my gender influences. I have no idea what I'm going to name this video. I haven't decided on a proper title yet, so I'm not opening with the title of the video as the talking point. I have no idea what I want to name it yet. So first of all, I like the idea of talking about how my gender influences me and my identity and just me as a person. And I like the idea of talking about how the things that influence my gender. So I think it's really important in self-exploration to talk about how our environments shape us and how we shape our own experiences based on a number of factors. So I've thought up, what kind of things shape my gender and what kinds of gendered experiences are shaped by me or my environment. So the things that influence my gender, the need to pass, it's a very common experience for transgender people, wanting to pass as my gender. That influences how I express myself in a gendered way. So my masculinity is based on the need to pass as male. At least, that's just kind of like my baseline. Like, I want to pass as male. I'm not entirely fully male. I'm not entirely fully binary, but just for the sake of safety, and for the sake of being stealth, I guess, I would want to pass as male at least. Abstract concepts influence my gender. I like the idea of thinking of my gender in the abstract. I talked about that in an earlier video where I explained that my gender's kind of like a little solar system, kind of like a system of planets, two planets orbiting like a sun, some kind of core, which is me. And I like thinking of my gender in pieces in general, either layers or building blocks, many pieces that make up two main pieces of one whole identity. And I talked about there being an overlap. So, either one identity bleeding into another, if I talk about like layering my gender, or talking about how, the two genders orbiting me or my identity, and the overlap is where they kind of cross paths. Being in queer communities, that absolutely influences my gender. Hearing the experiences of other queer people, hearing the experiences of other polygender people, other trans men, other people who are partially male or partially neutral. I love hearing how people experience their identity, how people came to discover their identity, why people use certain labels, why people use certain pronouns. I love to see where people are coming from, and that influences me. It influences how I explore my own identity, because maybe I'll find out something that I hadn't thought of before. Maybe somebody says like, oh, I'm trying out this way of expressing my gender because this is how I experience malehood. And then it just kind of unlocks something inside me where I'm like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that. I want to try something like that. I want to try expressing my malehood in a queer way. I want to view my malehood through a non-binary lens. I want to see what that does for me, see what kind of things I can explore and discover about myself in that way. Dysphoria absolutely influences my gender. I think from the very start, the idea of moving away from the feminine, moving away from female, being like, just realizing one day that no, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. It does not feel right. So exploring who I am not, exploring the things that make me uncomfortable, not only just, not wanting to be like entirely, sometimes I have a non-conforming gender expression. It's a little feminine leaning, but moving away from conventional binary femalehood or femininity, that kind of lets me know like this is where I belong, not like there. That also means other things, like I talked about the idea of being degendered, meaning I tell people that I am non-binary or genderqueer in some way, and that does not mean that I want people to use completely neutral, ungendered terminology for me. I don't want people using they, them to refer to me. That actually makes me dysphoric. So just understanding and exploring the things I'm uncomfortable with, things that make me dysphoric, in order to kind of shape my ideal gendered self. That also means transitioning. Like, my transitioning goals based on what makes me uncomfortable and what makes me not feel okay in my own skin. So, the choice between, getting top or bottom surgery or both or none, or being on hormones, being on low dose hormones, all these factors that play into how I want to move away from dysphoria and into euphoria. So how my gender influences me, it's kind of a weird concept. Like, your identity doesn't influence you. You influence your identity. Your environment influences your identity. Your identity can't influence you as a person, but I think thinking of it in the reverse, I like that idea. There's not as much to talk about in that regard. Taking on a gender label and saying, I am this gender, it shapes my self-discovery with newly adopted terminology, because if I had not decided to come out as bigender or to explore the label of being bigender and calling myself that, I would never have looked so far into my identity. Or before that, if I had not decided that I was a non-binary man, if I had not, considered that as a label for myself, I wouldn't have looked into what it means to be partially male or mostly male. I would not have picked apart my identity and decided, like, oh, I'm part male and part neutral. It's kind of stepping stones. Realizing that I'm a man was like the stepping stone into discovering that I am mostly male. I'm not fully male. And discovering that was a stepping stone into exploring being bigender, because I realized part one gender, part another gender. That's two genders. Partially or wholly, it doesn't matter. Like, that made me realize, like, oh, that is bigender. I am actually polygender. And exploring my identity as a non-binary man versus, thinking I was totally binary, completely masculine, like none of the like bells and whistles. Experimenting with gender presentation, it can kind of influence my gender. It's more like if I express myself in a neutral leaning way or a masculine leaning way, respectively, it influences whether I feel more neutral or more male on that day. And, experimenting with presenting in a not masculine way helps me to explore that more non-binary or other self. And of course, self-validation through passing as either completely male, masculine, or kind of neutral leaning, kind of a gender queer sort of presentation that's still male but in a non-binary way. That also helps influence my gender. Like, passing as a specific genderedness helps shape my gender identity. Because of course, if I'm successfully passing as a specific type of gender, then it solidifies that gender for me, and I'm like, oh, I'm definitely this, because it feels right. Like, I'm being validated in how I'm presenting. I'm being validated in how people view me as a gendered person. So if people are seeing the neutral side of my identity without completely deciding that I have no gender or completely neutral, null gender, that is validating, and it helps me realize that I can be both these genders at the same time, or, some days one gender, some days another gender, and it really solidifies the bigender label for me. That's kind of all I had to say for this video, believe it or not. It's kind of a short topic. I just wanted to talk about, how gender influences me and how the environment I'm in shapes and influences my gender. I'm sure a lot of people don't really consider their gender as something that influences anything around them. Some people probably think it's more like, sometimes the environment shapes my gender, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe that person decided to move away from their environment and away from things that could shape their gender in order to kind of explore their own gender outside of influences. And some people might think that like every little aspect of their life, their orientation, their neurotype, their peer group, the way they were raised, the things that make them dysphoric, the things that make them euphoric, everything, maybe that shapes every single aspect of their gender. There's so many different ways to experience and explore gender, which I love. And I like that I am picking apart this new bigender label and looking into, what pieces make up me. That's why I made this series in the first place. And I don't have a video planned, at least not as of now, recording this in July. I don't have a plan for this series after this video. It kind of ends here. There's nothing else that I wrote down for ideas that I could talk about. So let me know if you have any suggestions on new content. I will probably ask the community before this series starts to end. I'll ask, like, what else do you want to see? What do you want to see me explore in super detail? Like, what do you want to see me pick apart? I can start a new Monday series, or I can continue with this series and see what other things I can explore. I would love to get suggestions from the community, so let me know, and I'll go from there, I guess. Anyway, I am signing off for now. See you later.